So I had an epiphany just the other day, and this actually ties into my last two videos about the Israeli-Palestinian kerfuffle, let's call it. So if you haven't watched those, maybe go do that first. But basically, in those videos, I mentioned that it is entirely possible for people to be villains and victims at the same time. And I expressed frustration because there's a lot of people who consider themselves to be on the left politically who just refuse to acknowledge that. Because in the aftermath of the massive attack on Israel on October 7th, there were a lot of people who were either celebrating or justifying the attack, including the attack on civilians, which is just disgusting, even if you are supportive of the Palestinian cause. In fact, it's more disgusting if you are supportive of the Palestinian cause, because that just, makes it harder to convince people to take their side in things. But anyways, the point is, a lot of people just refuse to acknowledge that you can be a villain and a victim at the same time. Like, just because you have been wronged in the past doesn't mean everything you do is okay. And similarly, just because you have done horrible things now or in the recent past doesn't mean that you haven't also been wronged at some point. And not to sound like I'm bringing up horseshoe theory here, but I've noticed that the far left and the far right have, like, they kind of reach very similar conclusions here, but they use slightly different reasoning to do so. So to start with the right, and we'll just use the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as an example here because that's, topical at the moment, but the right will acknowledge that the other side, the enemy, as it were, are villains, but they will never ever acknowledge their victimhood status, even when it is valid. So, for example, they will point out, rightfully so, when Hamas or other Palestinian terrorist organizations do something horrific, like what happened on October 7th. They'll point out, hey, they're kidnapping people, taking hostages, raping people, murdering civilians, things that are pretty bad. And again, that have been done by Hamas or the PLO or Islamic Jihad or other organizations that have claimed to fight on behalf of Palestinian people before. And the right will look at these villainous acts and then refuse to acknowledge everything that led up to that and pretend that it was just done in a vacuum and that, well, that's just what those people are like, just pretending that they're just evil and can't be reasoned with. That way they can justify any response that they take, up to and including bombing refugee camps and hospitals and killing a shitload of kids, which is what the IDF has been doing for literal weeks now. I say weeks, but really they've been doing it for decades. But that is basically how the far right approaches this. They refuse to acknowledge the victimhood of the enemy and focus only on their villain status. Meanwhile, people on the left will acknowledge their own victim status, or at least the victim status of the people who they're on the side of, while also refusing to acknowledge when they do something unpleasant. So again, talking about the Palestinian cause here, they will point out the decades of abuse and deprivation and murder and genocide that Israel and the IDF have partaken in, which, again, that is all valid. That's all good. Whoa, sorry. That's all valid. It's a good point to bring up. Shit. Hopefully nobody clips that out of context. But yeah, that's all fair. That's things that happened and led to this current moment that we're at. But then they'll also just say, well, that makes it okay to massacre civilians. And just what? I'm sorry. If you are going to criticize the IDF for massacring civilians, which you should, but then you're going to excuse Hamas and the PLO doing similar things, or doing the exact same thing, then you don't actually care about dead civilians. The reverse is also true. If you're going to condemn Hamas and the PLO for killing civilians, but you're going to excuse the IDF doing it, you don't actually care about dead civilians, you are just using them as a prop. So, yeah, the far left and the far right come to similar conclusions here, but they use different reasoning to do it. And I just want to focus on the left here for a minute. I know I sound like I criticize the left a lot more here, but that's just because, I see so clearly what we're doing wrong, and I'm trying to get us to stop. I don't think I'll have much luck in trying to get us to stop doing shitty stuff like this, but, I can at least try. because there's this undercurrent of thinking that being a victim makes you morally pure and makes it so that you can do nothing wrong ever, because of that, there's a lot of people on the left who almost fetishize being a victim. They fetishize their victimhood. They fetishize being weak and being oppressed, and they almost don't want it to change. You know, like, I remember a while ago, I think it was Jessie Gender who said this, but I looked around for a bit and I couldn't find it, and I don't want to be accused of putting words in her mouth, even though I do explicitly not like that bitch. But there was at least someone who said a while ago that it's not about winning, it's about being correct, or something along those lines at least. And a lot of people were agreeing with them. And, what the fuck? Seriously, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, to me, again, that fetishizes victimhood. Like, people like that don't actually want to fix the problem. They want you to acknowledge the problem exists. They want to be able to point to the problem and say, look at this problem, look at me, I am such a victim, I am in such bad straits, I'm so horribly oppressed. And then they just use it as a form of virtue signaling, and they don't want to do anything past that. Like, again, they just look at their victimhood as making them morally pure and putting them above other people, and on some level they understand that if the problem was fixed, like if we got rid of whatever bigotry is affecting them, you know, if we got rid of transphobia or racism or anti-Semitism or whatever, then suddenly they would be fine, and then they would in their minds at least, they would no longer be morally pure, and they would no longer be better than other people. This also gives some people like a weird amount of influence and power, because again, other people look at them as victims and therefore as morally pure, and therefore they can do no wrong, and then they can just, I mean, there's no getting around it, they can bully people. Like a couple of months ago, there was that transgender teenager in England who was murdered, and people started say her name and using that as a hashtag to try and bring attention to it. And there were a couple of black activists who said, actually, that was for black people. You're not allowed to use that thing for other people. It's ours. You're not allowed to take it, even though it was originally coined by American Indian activists who were trying to draw attention to the massive number of missing and murdered indigenous women. But never mind that. That was something they did, and they essentially just bullied a bunch of people into not using their phrase. Please note the quotes around the word their phrase. And people were just happy to listen to them and happy to do whatever they said because, well, they're black, therefore they've been subject to discrimination in the past, therefore they can do no wrong. And like that is just an actual undercurrent on the left. I don't know if I would say this is like the majority viewpoint, but it is not a fringe either. And I wish it was, but it's just not. And what really made this click for me was just the other day I was looking at a post on Reddit, and specifically it was a post on the 2X chromosomes subreddit about porn, and it was just bemoaning how, oh my god, there's porn around and men use it a lot. And I mean, I will probably link to it down below if you want to read it yourself. And I mean, I've talked about the problems that porn can have, overconsumption of porn can have myself. I have experienced the problems it can have myself, and you can go watch me talk about that for a while if you want to. But a lot of people on that post were really playing things up and going overboard with it, and it was clear that they either were ignorant about the subject or they were just lying. Like when they were claiming that mainstream porn is really violent and really degrading and full of things like choking and causing girls to vomit by shoving your dick so far back in their throat. And I'm like, yeah, that stuff exists, but it's not mainstream. Like anyone who's claiming it's really common and easy to find on like the front page of Pornhub, they're either lying to you or they're just ignorant. You know, like they don't know it firsthand, but they heard from someone who heard from someone else who heard from someone else that that's what's happening. And if that is what's happening, then somewhere down the line there was somebody else who was lying. And there was one comment in particular, I won't read it all, but I'll put it up on screen right here, where there was a person, a highly upvoted comment, by the way, and there was a person who was saying that sex is evil, like it's inherently violent towards women, like it's a drive for men to destroy them and stuff, and therefore porn is evil because it's just commodifying that. And it made me realize that this person sees the problem but does not want to fix it at all, because this person is, in a weird way, this person is a narcissist, but they're a narcissist who doesn't want to be seen as like the pinnacle of humanity or anything. They want to be seen as morally pure, and they want people to pity them. And by framing sex and pornography in this way, they have made it so that the problem is impossible to solve. Like, if they can get everybody to believe and see things their way, then the problem is just inherent to humanity and inherent to the world, and therefore no one can do anything about it. Therefore, let's not even try. And that way they will always be seen as morally pure and always be seen as above others. Like, I mean, I've complained about rad femmes before because they're not really feminists, but that's a different topic of discussion. And I mean, this is a pretty big thing in the rad femme movement. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's a pretty big thing among them. Like, this idea that, okay, because we are women and we have been put upon because of that, that means we can do no wrong ever. And, like, again, like, this subreddit it's on Reddit. Like, the men of Reddit are fucking stupid. It's time we stop pretending that the women of Reddit are any different, you know? Like, they're stupid, they're self-centered, they're lacking in self-awareness, and the women are the same, you know? But this is a common theme throughout that whole subreddit, is that we can do no wrong no matter what. And you see that in, again, all sorts of activist communities. You see that among Jews who are doing horrific, horrific things to Palestinians right now. You see that among black activists who, again, do stuff like try and take hashtags away from people who are trying to draw attention to a transgender girl that was murdered. Or Dave Chappelle, who also really hates trans people and really doesn't like Jews that much, but he talks a lot about how awful black people have it. Because, again, it turns into like the oppression Olympics, which is a phrase that I don't hear used very often anymore, but it used to be common because it was people constantly trying to one-up each other about how, oh, well, I'm Jewish, therefore I have it worse. Actually, I'm gay, I have it worse. Well, I'm black, I have it worse. No, I'm a gay woman, so I have it worse. You know, just shit like that, you know? And, again, it's not a fucking competition. If it was, American Indians would have it worse. I'm sorry, don't take that seriously. It's not a competition. Everybody has very serious problems to go through. Some people, you can argue it's more severe than others, but that's not the point. It's not a zero-sum game. But people treat it like it's a zero-sum game because they don't want to solve the problem. They want to be morally pure. And if other people are morally pure, then that makes them look less impressive by comparison, so they have to make those other people impure, and therefore those other people have to be suffering less. I've gotten a fair amount of shit in my life for being an atheist, and before that I got shit from various people for being the wrong kind of Christian. Like, I understand what this is like, at least to an extent. I haven't gotten it as bad as a lot of people have, but I understand what it's like to be mistreated for something that is just inherent to you, or at least something that seems inherent to you, because religion is, you know, belief, and that changes over time. But I have gotten over that by addressing the problem and trying to fix it, whether that be through trying to convince people over to my way of thinking, in terms of atheism at least. I have tried to do that with some people over the years, with, I don't know how much success you could really say, but I've tried. Or by just, like, surrounding yourself with better people, in some cases. In some cases, that's not really an option, but I address the problem, is what I'm getting at here. You know, like, activism and stuff, that is addressing the problem. But a lot of people just don't want to. So if you ever see somebody trying to frame their problems as being impossible to fix, like in the case of that lady who was saying sex is inherently violent, and I don't even know. I fucking hate those types of people, I swear. But if you see somebody doing that, or you see somebody playing the oppression Olympics, like, oh, I am minority X, therefore I have it worse than minority Y, then you just need to ask them, do you want to fix the problem, or do you just want to virtue signal? Like, do you just want to sit here and complain? And a lot of them, if they're being honest, will just want to sit there and complain. That's all.